A traveling tradesman spots a noble lady sitting alone on a bench, enjoying a sandwich, and it looks really tasty, so he approaches her and asks if she'd let him try some. The lady readily agrees since she's always happy to share her meals with others, so she reaches into her picnic basket and makes the man a sandwich. When he tries it, he is delighted by how delicious it tastes, so he asks the lady if she'd share the recipe with him. However, he probably should have asked that before he ate it because the girl informs him that the sandwich had blackhorn wolf meat in there. The tradesman awkwardly excuses himself and throws up next to a tree because he never could have anticipated that she'd give him a monster meat sandwich. Blackhorns are notorious for their poisonous flesh, so he thinks the lady must be insane to be eating it so casually, but while she may be weird, she's not stupid. She went through a lot of effort to process the meat so it would be safe enough to eat, but so far, no one has been open-minded enough to give her food a fair chance. A few days later, Melf is attending a banquet and she can't get enough of the wide variety of meat she gets to stuff her face with. Everything here is both delicious and well presented, so she's having trouble deciding what to eat next. But before she could wander off on her own, Mrs. Talbot walks over and reminds her that she's not here for the food. The autumn banquet is an excuse for all the nobles in the land to gather and associate with one another for political reasons, so in plain terms, Melf is here to find a different kind of meat. She didn't actually want to come since she knew she'd be bored out of her mind, but her stepmom threatened to send her to a monastery and have her become a monk if she didn't get engaged by the end of the year, so she had no choice. Her dad wasn't as pushy about it, but he did still ask her to find someone soon, which is why she agreed to attend this event. But things aren't going well for her since all the nobles here recognize her as the monster meat muncher, and they don't want to get involved with her. She decides to head to a different section of the party where most of the knights have gathered, and she plans to find a knight who hasn't heard the rumors about her and convince him to get married to her before he finds out about her little hobby. But before she could actually talk to anyone, a huge commotion breaks out as several nobles scream that monsters are attacking the banquet. Can't say it's surprising since this was bound to happen when you hold a banquet with tons of food in the middle of the forest, but that's not the point right now. Melf starts running away along with the rest of the nobles as the knights charge forward to confront the monster, but then she notices an old couple nearby who seem to be having some trouble. She goes over to ask them if everything is alright, but while the couple isn't hurt, the man's walking stick just broke, so he can't get up on his own anymore. Melf offers to help him stand so they can all get out of here, and they are grateful for her assistance, but just then their eyes go wide because there's something huge behind Melf. She turns around and is shocked to see a wild blackhorn standing right there. There's still enough time for her to run without the monster noticing her, but if she did that, then the old couple would be left in harm's way. So instead, she starts shouting to get the monster's attention and bait it into following her away from the old-timers. She's glad that she managed to save them, but there's no way she can outrun it, so this might really be the end for her. However, just as she was about to be trampled, a lone knight dashes forward and beheads the blackhorn in one swift motion. His name is Roger Galbraith, and he is well known as the Blood-Mad Duke because of how ruthless he is when it comes to battles. And the people here really seem to enjoy gossiping because Roger just saved all their lives, but they're too busy murmuring about how terrifying he is to thank him like normal people. Melf falls silent at the realization that the man before her right now is the famous blood-crazed Duke, and she's not sure if the rumors about him being a blood-crazed serial killer are true or not, but that doesn't matter to her right now because Roger is way too hot for her to care. She gets up and introduces herself to him, which comes as a surprise to Roger since most women would have run away from him by now in a situation like this. Just then, Melf notices some of the blackhorn blood dripping towards Roger's mouth, and she frantically asks him to wipe it off before he accidentally ingests it, because the blood of a corrupted blackhorn is incredibly toxic to people. And even if it wasn't corrupted, she knows from personal experience that ingesting the raw blood of a beast will give you severe diarrhea. Roger doesn't know what to say at this point since he has never met a girl who knows so much about monsters, and Melf soon realizes that she might have freaked him out by talking too much. Roger appreciates Melf's concern, but he already has some holy water ready to deal with any potential blood poisoning. He even offers some to Melf since even though she probably didn't swallow any blood, it never hurts to be safe. Roger then notices that her dress is covered in blood, so he offers to take her somewhere so she can get a replacement, but while Melf appreciates the gesture, she tells him that it won't be necessary. Monster blood washes out really easily with a little warm water and baking soda, so her dress isn't ruined or anything. But that's not what Roger was referring to. Most nobles are disgusted by the mere thought of wearing clothes tainted by monster blood, so he wonders why it doesn't seem to bother her. Without thinking, Melf blurts out that she butchers monsters all the time, so she's used to getting covered in blood every now and then. Roger is shocked to learn that Melf butchers monsters, and she realizes she has said way too much, so she apologizes for it. But instead of being disgusted by her, Roger bursts out in laughter because he recalls hearing rumors about Melf eating monsters, and he can't believe it's actually true. Monsters in this world are very different when compared to regular animals. Due to the magical energy that their bodies contain, consuming monster meat typically causes vomiting and fevers, so it is generally discarded, but Melf always thought that was wasteful. There's no point in hiding it now, so she admits that the rumors are indeed true, and that when she looks at that corpse over there, the only thing she can think about is how tasty the meat would be. But she realizes saying it out loud makes it sound even worse. By this point, she expects Roger to awkwardly shuffle away any minute, so she puts on her best. I don't know what to do anymore, smile and waits to see what he does. But as it turns out, Roger is actually enchanted by the lovely smile on Melf's blood-covered face. So much so that he can barely look her in the eyes, so instead he grabs her hand and starts leading her away from the party. After a while, Roger realizes he should probably say something so things don't get awkward, so he asks Melf if the monster meat actually tastes good. This isn't the first time someone has asked Melf this question, but it usually doesn't end well when she gives an honest answer. She tells Roger that blackhorn meat actually tastes a lot like beef, but while most would sneer and disregard her opinion as crazy talk, Roger actually seems to be taking her seriously, and that's a first for her, so she's really happy. She goes on to explain that the key to making the meat safe to eat is getting rid of all the magic in it, and she says that's easy enough to do during the bleeding process. So Roger asks her if she'd be willing to make some for him. Melf says she'd be more than happy to do so, but she does warn him that meat from mad beasts like the one he killed today tends to be a little rough on the stomach even with proper preparation, so he's going to have to wait until she can get her hands on some non-corrupted meat. Roger says he's looking forward to it, but in the meantime, he still wants to get Melf a new dress to change into, so he leads her back to his trute's pavilion. Roger's subordinate, Chaos, comes out to greet him upon his arrival, and after Melf introduces herself, he is instructed to get her a new dress to change into. In the meantime, Roger takes her to one of the tents and prepares a little bath of hot water so she can wash the blood off her face. Melf insists that there's no need for him to go so much trouble for her sake, especially when there's way more monster blood on him than there is on her. She tells Roger he should prioritize cleaning himself first, but that was always the plan, and he has already started taking his shirt off. He doesn't see anything wrong with it since he does it all the time, but Melf, on the other hand, is getting extremely flustered. She'd have seen knights take their shirts off during training sessions before, but it still spikes her heart rate every time it happens. Roger asks her if something is wrong, and Melf doesn't want to lie, so she admits that she was admiring his incredible physique. Roger has never really put much thought into what his body looks like, but he does train often to be able to fight monsters regularly, so it's natural that he'd be muscular. Melf thought he looked cool when he beheaded the Blackhorn, so she asks him if she'd be able to learn how to do that as well. Roger says anyone can learn to do what he did, but in Melf's case, her arms aren't conditioned for it, so she'd be better off leaving the fighting to him. He asks her if there's any particular monster she'd like to try since he'd be willing to hunt it down for her. And as soon as he says this, Melf's eyes light up because there are so many things she has been dying to taste. But just then, Chaos returns and lightly scolds Roger because he thinks it is inappropriate for him to be half naked in front of a young lady like this. Roger argues that he only took off his shirt so he's not completely exposed, but either way, it's still not appropriate. A little while later, Melf has changed into the dress Chaos prepared for her, and she absolutely loves the design on it. Roger says he borrowed that dress from the Queen a while ago, and he thinks it looks really good on her. But the entire time he has been holding the head of the Blackhorn, and all his men are shocked that Melf doesn't seem to mind. Most ladies would have fainted if Roger came anywhere near them with that thing, so they are all happy that he finally found someone he gets along with. Later that evening, it's time for Melf to return home, so Roger escorts her back to her carriage. She thanks him once again for saving her life and says goodbye. He tells her that the next time they meet, he will have a special present ready for her, and she says she can't wait, but if he's going to be bringing a monster for her, she requests that he capture it alive because the meat would taste better that way. Roger has never tried capturing a monster alive before, but he's up for the challenge. However, that might take a while, so in the meantime, Melf offers Roger some Skatspit monster jerky she made, and she assures him that she was very thorough with the preparation process, so there's no risk of him getting sick from it. If Melf is the one who made it, Roger trusts that it'll be safe, so he takes a bite without hesitation, and he is pleasantly surprised by how delicious it actually is. Chaos yells at Roger because it's reckless for someone of his authority to eat food without having it tested for poison first, but Roger says it's fine and sticks a piece of the meat in Chaos's mouth to show him how good it tastes. They both agree that it's delicious, and Roger tells Melf that he can't wait to see what else she can make the next time they meet, but all of a sudden she ducks her head down. She was brought to tears by the fact that someone finally recognizes her hobby and doesn't think she's weird for eating monster meat. She pulls herself together so she can say her last goodbye to Roger, but she can hardly wait to meet him again. It takes a few days for Melf's carriage to get her home, and by the time they return, it is already snowing in the region. Melf looks ahead, and to her surprise, she sees her father waiting for her at the gate. So once she gets there, he opens the door and she asks him if something is wrong. At first, she thinks he might be upset because she did manage to get engaged, but that's not exactly it. He reminds her that he is merely a count and he has no idea how to handle things now that she has gotten involved with a duke. Melf isn't sure what he is talking about, so her father informs her that Roger Galbraith is asking for her hand in marriage, and he already sent a formal proposal letter, so he isn't sure how to respond. Melf can see that her father is freaking out, and frankly, she is too, because she knew she and Roger had gotten along well at the banquet, but she didn't think he'd take it this far so quickly. As for what happened on Roger's end, after Melf departed, he returned to his pavilion to give a status update on his duties to the Crown Prince, also known as Maxim, Roger's older brother. Roger informed him that his men have completed a sweep of the area to make sure there are no more dangerous beasts nearby, and that the monster's den has already been dealt with appropriately. Maxim thanks him for doing such a good job, but he asks Roger if he could stop addressing him so formally all the time since they are brothers after all. However, Roger says he can't do that because while they may be related by blood, 17 years ago, Maxim was appointed as Crown Prince, and Roger was adopted by the Galbraith family, so he is nothing more than Maxim's subject now. Maxim can see that Roger isn't going to be dropping the formalities anytime soon, so he asks him if he has anything else he wants to talk about. Like for instance, a date he had with a cute redhead girl recently. Roger is shocked that Maxim already knows about that, but he says he keeps tabs on everything his darling little brother gets up to. While Roger was distracted, Maxim reaches into the picnic basket he had gotten from Melf and takes out a piece of jerky. Without a second thought, he takes a bite out of it, and he is impressed by how good it tastes, so he asks Roger what kind of meat it is. Roger sighs because a crown prince really shouldn't be eating stuff without confirming what it is first, but since he wants to know, Melf said this was jerky made from scatsbit meat, these little guys. Maxim finds it intriguing that a monster could taste this good, so he asks if Melf made it herself, because if she did, she might be onto something. But the jerky aside, Maxim is much more interested in talking about what Roger plans to do with Melf. Normally, it'd be unheard of for the daughter of a count to be involved with a duke, but Roger has had an undisputed L streak with the ladies, so meeting Melf might be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for a loner like him. Roger has no interest in listening to his brother's teasing, so he says he has nothing more to report and walks out of the tent. He finds it annoying that his brother keeps butting into his business all the time, but he admits to himself that Maxim may be right. It's not often that someone takes a genuine interest in Roger, much less someone who is as brave and captivating as Melf, so he needs to think about his next move carefully. He eventually decides that the best course of action would be to fulfill his promise and capture that monster Melf had asked him for so he can surprise her the next time they meet. Meanwhile, back at Melf's home, she and her father are busy staring at the jewel-encrusted letter that was sent here. Melf's father tells her that before she returned, a messenger from the Duke's family arrived on a Blaze Eagle to deliver this letter, and Melf is disappointed that she didn't get to see the Blaze Eagle in person. But that's not the point here. Her father asks her what happened between her and the Duke, so Melf explains that she was simply attacked by a monster, so Roger stepped in to save her. Her father can't believe that's really all that happened because Melf had never so much as seen Roger before this banquet, and now he's asking for her hand in marriage. Melf takes a look at the letter, and it definitely looks like something Roger had written, since it talks about all the fun he had with Melf right before he asked her hand in marriage, but Melf can't help but wonder if there's some kind of ulterior motive here. Her father tells her she doesn't have to accept the proposal if she doesn't want to, but he'd have to make up a really good reason to turn down an engagement request from a duke. Later that night, Melf takes a closer look at the letter Roger sent, and she comes to the conclusion that he must love monster meat just as much as she does, so he wants to get closer to her so he will have someone to share the hobby with. However, as she squeezes the letter tight, she notices that some magic seems to be coming off of it, and a hidden message is suddenly revealed. It says that Roger will visit her before the end of the winter, specifically by the 18th of the month, which just so happens to be tomorrow, so Melf's father starts freaking out again. Melf is just as flustered because she didn't think she'd get to meet him again so soon. She's still not sure what his intentions are, but there's no point in worrying about that right now. The next morning, Melf's stepmother comes to her room to wake her up, and she's appalled by the fact that Melf is still in her nightgown this late in the morning. She makes up an excuse and says she was just waiting for Celia to get here so she could help pick out an outfit, but in reality, she literally woke up a minute before Celia arrived. As far as stepmothers go, Celia isn't particularly mean to Melf, but she's not very nice either, and she never misses a chance to scrutinize every decision Melf takes. She knows she was the one who insisted on Melf finding a husband as soon as possible, but she asks her what she was thinking choosing the blood-mad Duke of all people. Melf couldn't care less about all of Celia's comments, so she just stands there silently while her maids get her dressed, but all of a sudden she hears a loud roar outside, so she rushes to open the window and sees a flock of glacial dragons approaching. Glacial dragons are common around here, so Melf realizes this must be Roger's envoy, and a few moments later he flies up next to Melf's window and tells her he's here to ask for her hand in marriage. He also mentions that he brought the gift he promised her last time, and she's excited to hear that, but Celia is terribly frightened by the dragon, so she yells for Melf to close the window immediately. Melf leans outside and asks Roger to land the dragons over by the northern pasture, and once he's gone, she closes the window and buries her face into the curtains to hide how much she is blushing. She already knew Roger was handsome, but seeing him riding on a dragon so casually made him look way cooler than usual, and her heart is beating so fast that she doesn't know what to do. While Melf was trying to calm herself down, Celia has been trying to get her attention for a while now, and once she finally gets through to her, she tells Melf that she's going to lie down for a bit because seeing that dragon made her feel ill. As she is leaving, she grumbles to herself about how Roger must really be insane to be riding dragons around like that, and that he's not fit to be a duke, but Melf refuses to let her badmouth Roger any further, so she tells Celia that she intends to accept Roger's proposal, and she'd appreciate it if Celia would refrain from speaking about her future husband that way. Celia leaves the room in a huff after that, and an hour or so later Melf meets with Roger out in the pasture. There she explains to him that she only found out that he'd be visiting when she read his letter yesterday, so she wasn't able to prepare anything for him, but Roger doesn't mind. If anything, he should be the one apologizing for showing up so abruptly. Just then, Chaos speaks up and says the only reason they came so quickly was because Roger couldn't wait to see her again, but Roger tells him to stop spouting nonsense. Anyway, Roger asks Melf where she'd like him to drop off her gift, and as he says this, he points over to a cage wrapped in a cloth, so Melf's eyes light up at the realization that he really did capture the monster for her. She knows she's the one who asked for it, but now she feels a little bad for making him go out of his way for her sake. Roger notices that she's acting a little strange, so he asks Melf if something is wrong, and all of a sudden she looks up and sincerely thanks him for his effort. She asks if it would be okay for her to take a little peek inside, and Roger sees no issue with that, so he leads her over to the cage. Melf doesn't see any movement coming from it, so she asks Roger if he already killed it, but he pulls the cloth away to reveal that the Moodle is still very much alive, just unconscious. And not only that, he managed to nab a golden-furred royal Moodle, which is extremely rare. Moodles are monsters similar to cows, which usually have white fur, but royal Moodles develop a gold color as they grow, making their fur incredibly valuable for things like coats and scarves, but their meat often ends up being discarded, which Melf thinks is such a waste. Melf has never gotten to try one before, but since it's a herbivore that only feeds on fruits and mushrooms, she expects that it'll taste delicious. But that aside, finding one with fur this nice is rare, so Melf asks Roger if he's really sure he wants to give her something this valuable. Roger tells her he wouldn't have gone through all the trouble of capturing it alive if he wasn't going to give it to her, and Melf is really happy to hear that because it means she is free to prepare it in any way she chooses. She can't express just how happy Roger has made her, and it's clear that seeing her like this has Roger really flustered, so Chaos and the others just stand back and let him have his moment. A little while later, Melf's father arrives to formally greet Roger, and he thanks him for making the long journey out here. Roger apologizes for showing up so suddenly, but he said he wanted to get a response to his proposal before winter set in, and Melf had been so excited by the Moodle that she almost forgot that Roger is here to ask for her hand in marriage. She asks her father for permission to let Roger's dragons hunt in the mountains, and he isn't opposed to the idea, but he is a bit confused because he assumed that Moodle over there was meant to be food for dragons. However, Melf tells him the Moodle is actually for her. Melf's dad is surprised to hear that since he didn't think Roger knew about her hobby, but she tells him Roger actually went out of his way just so he could try some of her monster cooking. And on that note, she asks her dad for permission to open a research facility so she can start preparing the Moodle as soon as possible. Her dad worries that seeing Melf butcher a monster might be off-putting to Roger, but he speaks up and tells Melf's father that he understands her to some extent, and he is also aware of the nasty rumors surrounding her, and he is proposing despite them. Hearing that Roger is so interested in Melf is the best news her dad has heard all day, so he tells Roger that he should make himself at home. But before that, Roger says he'd like to do something about the gift he brought before it wakes up since it's still alive. Melf's father is shocked to learn that Roger brought a living Moodle here, but Melf was the one who asked him to capture it alive. On that note, since he's here, Roger says he'd like to watch the preparation process, so her dad tells her to show him to her research facility. Roger and his men take off on the dragons to start heading towards the facility, and Melf is having a great time since she has always wanted to try riding a dragon. As the facility comes into view, Melf points it out to Roger, but he can sense a bit of hesitation in her voice, so he asks her if something is wrong. Melf plays it off and says she's just nervous about riding a dragon for the first time, but that's not actually what's bothering her. She's happy that Roger doesn't mind her eating monster meat, but she won't know if he is truly okay with it until he has seen how she prepares it, and she is rather nervous because she's not sure how he will react. Upon arriving at the lab, Roger notices an ancient magic circle inscribed onto the floor. He asks Melf about it, so she explains that it was originally her mother's creation, but she made some improvements to it. She says this is what she uses to prepare the monster meat, and Roger thinks it's a genius idea, but he wonders how she manages to pull it off since it would be difficult to drain all the magic out of a monster corpse with just this circle. Melf tells him there's actually one more tool used in the process, so she goes into the storage shed and pulls out a quartz flask. She explains that she uses this to draw out the beast's mana and blood at the same time. And while it may look ordinary right now, once she starts the process and applies her magic to it, she says it will become a lot more colorful. Roger is impressed by Melf's craftsmanship, but now that she has explained how it works, she would like to request a favor from Roger. She knows this may sound a little strange, but she says she wants to see him use his sword to behead a monster again. A little while later, Melf says she's ready to begin, but cleaning the moodle by herself is going to take a while, so she asks Roger for a little help, and with a wave of his hand, his subordinates immediately get to work. Knights are usually in charge of harvesting valuable materials from the monsters they kill, so they are really efficient at it, and in a few minutes, the moodle has been completely sheared. Melf loves how fluffy all the golden moodle fur is, but that's not why they are here, so Roger takes off his jacket and asks Melf if she's ready to have him beheaded. Melf says a little prayer for the moodle and promises not to waste any of its meat before activating the magic circle and giving Roger the signal to go ahead. He raises his sword and, in one swift motion, the moodle's head is severed from its body. Roger's strike was so fast and precise that Melf could barely keep track of it, but now that the moodle has been slain, it's time for her to extract its blood and magic. She holds the flask and chants another incantation, causing the blood in the carcass to flow into the flask, but this is the first time Melf has ever worked with such a large beast, so there's a lot more magic blood than she thought there would be. The flask begins to crack as it is filled beyond capacity, and Melf is starting to panic because she can't stop once the spell has begun, but fortunately, Roger is right beside her, so she explains the problem, and he grabs a replacement flask to swap out with the full one. Thanks to his help, Melf is able to complete the spell unimpeded, and the moodle is successfully drained of all its blood. Roger is glad that it worked out well, but he's surprised that the moodle still looks so big since he thought removing all the blood would shrink it down a bit. Melf explains that the spell she used specifically targets only the monster's blood, leaving all other moisture intact to preserve the flavor. Roger is once again impressed and asks how the spell was developed, so Melf explains that 17 years ago, this region was suffering a severe famine. Hundreds of people had already died of hunger since the land here is poor in resources and the soil is hardly fertile, so Melf's mother began researching ways to make use of the abundant monster population here. The process is still a bit complicated right now, but if Melf figures out a way to simplify it further, then anyone would be able to use it, and it would transform monsters from a dangerous nuisance to a valuable food source. That's why Melf chose to take the challenge after her mother's passing, but she admits that she also has a lot of fun sampling rare monsters from time to time. Roger can tell that Melf's goal is a noble one, but he has one more question he would like to ask. He holds up the flask of magic blood and asks her what she intends to do with it. Melf says she just uses the magic energy from it to start fires and power the lights, and this much should last around 2 months before she needs to refill, but Roger is surprised that that's all she uses it for. Melf asks if there's another way to use it, and Roger bursts out laughing at the realization that she really has no idea what she has achieved. He explains that Melf has accomplished something that even the royal court mages have struggled to do for years. She has found a way to extract and store pure magic essence in a bottle, and in the wrong hands, something like this could be used to create weapons of mass destruction. She had no idea she was essentially making bombs, but Roger says it's not a problem since he knows she would never harm anyone. He's just glad that the rumors about her drinking the blood aren't true, because with how bewitching her hair looked, he was starting to worry that she might be a vampire. Melf gets flustered by Roger's compliment, and she doesn't know what to say, so without thinking, she starts talking about how dazzling Roger looked when he rode in on his dragon earlier, until they both get embarrassed and just stand there in silence. This is becoming hard to watch, so Chaos interjects and reminds the two that there's still a lot of work to be done, so they awkwardly shuffle away. A little while later, Melf comes up to Roger with a hunting permit. Roger had fed the moodle's organs to his dragon, but it wasn't enough for them, so he needs to go out and catch some more monsters before they become fussy. Just then, Roger's stomach begins to growl, indicating that he's really hungry as well, So even though they are technically meant to wait till dinner time, Melf suggests that it wouldn't hurt to try a few pieces of the meat right now. The two take a few cuts of the meat, and just as they are about to begin cooking, Roger remembers that he brought something special for this occasion. He takes out a slice middle and tells Melf to give it a try, so she tastes a small piece, and she is astonished by the combination of flavors it has. Roger explains that he swiped this from his head chef before he left home, and it is apparently a blend of various spices, so it goes really well with meat. Roger and Melf prepare 2 skewers and are practically drooling in anticipation as they wait for it to cook, but while they are standing there, Chaos sneaks up on them and asks what they think they are doing. Roger tries to cover it up and says there's nothing going on here, but Chaos can clearly smell the delicious aroma coming from over here, so there's no hiding it. Roger then remembers the hunting permit he got earlier, so he takes it out and tries to get Chaos to go away by ordering him to go get some monsters for the dragons. Chaos says he will gladly do so, but he wants Roger to come with him since he is their best fighter. Roger tries to get out of it by saying he is busy with Melf here, but Chaos guilt trips him by asking what kind of commander sneaks himself a snack while his team is starving. Roger eventually caves and says he will make a skewer for Chaos as well, but then Chaos points out that the entire team is right here, so Roger ends up making one for each of them. A few minutes later, Roger's skewer is done, but Chaos tells him he can't eat it yet since the batch still needs to be taste tested to make sure there's no poison left in there. As such, Chaos is the first one to take a bite, and while he was expecting it to be good, the meat turned out to be even better than he had imagined it would be. He says it doesn't taste gamey at all, and in fact, it practically melts in his mouth with each bite. Melf is happy to hear that the meat turned out so well, but hearing Chaos describe how delicious the meat is makes Roger even hungrier than he was before. He tells Chaos to just hurry up and announce that the meat is safe to eat, but Chaos wants to mess with him a little, so he tells Roger that he can't be sure if the meat is truly safe, yet since it would take a few hours for magical energy to cause any stomach trouble, but neither Roger nor his knights want to wait that long. Melf is also at her wit's end, so she tells the soldiers that she's done waiting, but if anyone actually does get sick from the meat, then she will do everything in her power to prepare medicine for them. That's good enough of an insurance policy for them. So they all take a skewer and dig in. Everyone is delighted by the flavor, especially Melf, because this is the highest quality monster meat she has ever had the pleasure of tasting. Roger walks up to Melf and tells her she's a genius for being able to make monster meat taste so good. She tries saying she was only able to do it thanks to her mother's research, but Roger tells her not to be so modest because he doesn't know anyone else who could accomplish what she just did. Roger and his knights have eaten monster meat on the rare occasion that they run out of supplies while out on a mission, but it always tasted terrible since they didn't know how to prepare it properly. He then asked his men for their opinion on Melf's brilliance, and they all agree that she is a culinary genius. The group prepares a few more skewers for everyone, and Roger is about to snag himself a third one when Melf suddenly calls his name. He thinks she's about to scold him for eating so much before dinner, so he tells her he will still be able to finish his food later, but that's not what she wanted to talk to him about. She tells Roger that she's about to head back into the lab, and she would like him to come with her. Roger follows Melf inside and she leads him to an old room with a bunch of her research material lying around. She apologizes for how messy it is in here, but Roger says it's normal for research labs to be a bit disorganized, so it doesn't bother him. He takes a look around and notices a couple of scatspit spikes on a table, so he asks Melf about them, and she explains that she sometimes uses those to set traps for the monsters she catches. He's intrigued to find out that Melf also knows how to make traps to capture monsters, since he had been wondering how she managed to get monsters to test out her techniques on, but she tells him she doesn't always use traps. The knights here help her occasionally, and sometimes she enlists the local hunters, but most of the time she has to go hunting by herself. Roger is surprised to hear that, so he asks her if the people here don't approve of her research. Melf tells him he is right, but there's nothing she can do about their beliefs since people naturally hate the idea of eating monster meat. Even when her mother saved the starving masses by preparing the meat to make it edible, all those who survived thanks to her effort deny the fact that the meat they ate came from monsters. They believe that it is taboo to consume monsters, so they have never acknowledged the research Melf conducts, and Roger thinks she must be quite stout to persist in her research despite the scorn of the people around her. But in reality, the things they say do get to her sometimes. If that's the case, it's not like Roger thinks she should stop, but he asks why Melf bothers to continue the research when no one accepts it. She turns to Roger and asks him if he remembers the incident that occurred 17 years ago. He says he couldn't possibly forget it because it's the entire reason he was adopted into the Galbraith family. If Melf's origins are related to that incident, he knows it is going to be difficult for her to discuss, so he takes her by the hand and leads her over to the sofa, so she doesn't have to look him in the eyes while she speaks. He reminds Melf that he came here to ask for her hand in marriage, so he did his homework on her family, and he has a good idea of the controversy around her research. but he says he doesn't want her to give up on it. He tells her that if she marries him, then with the resources from the Galbraith family, she would be able to continue working unimpeded. Melf tenses up a little and tells Roger that if he wants to learn about her research, then she will be more than happy to teach him everything she knows, so there's no need to force himself to marry her. However, that's not what he meant at all. He says she's the one he wants to learn about, and he knows he's not exactly the best option for a partner since he is well known as the blood-mad Duke, but he wants to know what Melf thinks about him. He looks to Melf for an answer, but she is too stunned to speak right now because this entire time, she had convinced herself that Roger was only interested in her because of her monster meat research, so she can't believe he actually likes her as a person. Roger asks her what she thinks of him as a partner, and Melf had really given it much thought till now, but marrying Roger would actually work out pretty well. Her father was willing to accept it even if she got engaged to a knight, so he has no reason to object to a duke. Furthermore, when she thinks about getting to spend every day with a man like Roger, her heart skips several beats at once. However, she is still on the fence about it since she definitely looked inferior standing next to him, and she wouldn't want to bring Roger's image down, but the offer is too good to pass up. She asks him why he chose her out of all people, since a man of his social status would have many potential brides aiming for him. Even if they were to get married, she doubts Roger's family would approve of it since even though the negative views regarding monster meat aren't as common over in Galbraith, no one would want to be associated with the rumors surrounding Melf. However, Roger cuts her off and says he thinks his people would actually be very welcoming to her. There is a large forest in the Galbraith territory called the Urzane Woods, and it is considered a treasure trove of monsters because no matter how many Roger hunts down, more always seem to pop up. It's gotten so bad that he is running out of ways to dispose of the monster carcasses, so to him, monsters are nothing more than targets for extermination. That's why when he heard Melf speak so enthusiastically about eating them, it gave him a new perspective on the creatures. When he's out on expedition, Roger and his men would sometimes eat monster meat if they ran low on food supplies, but they had no idea there were ways to completely drain the harmful magic energy like Melf did. It effectively turns the nuisance monsters into viable food sources, and Roger is sure that his people will appreciate that. Melf is overjoyed by the thought of her research being of use to others, and Roger adds that as long as he is around, he won't let her face the scorn or disapproving glares of the other nobles. Melf tells Roger that she is delighted by his offer, but she honestly still doesn't think she deserves someone like him. As he hears her say this, Roger thinks Melf is trying to turn him down in an indirect manner, but she doesn't want to leave any room for complicated misunderstandings, so she grabs his hand and tells him she just meant that she doesn't know how to do most things that other maidens would be able to, but as long as he is okay with it, she would be happy to marry him. Her only real talent lies with her research, but at the very least, since Roger's duties require him to slay monsters regularly, she can turn those carcasses into delicious meals for him so they don't go to waste. Just then, Claude, one of Melf's guards, shows up to inform Roger that Melf's father is waiting for him back at the castle, so the two cut their conversation short and get ready to leave. As Melf walks out the door, Claude leans in and tells her it may not be wise to discuss sensitive information regarding this territory with someone she has known for a total of 48 hours at this point, and Melf takes his concern into account. As the three walk down the hall, Roger can tell that Claude is awfully wary of him. Claude has been keeping an eye on him all day, but Roger understands that a reaction like that is not unwarranted when he has a reputation as a blood-mad duke. A little while later, Roger meets with Melf's father to finalize the details of his engagement to Melf, and Melf's father is really nervous because he isn't used to talking to a duke so casually. He is pleased to hear that Roger acknowledges all of Melf's hard work and cares about her, but as her father, he would still like to know why Roger is interested in her. Roger explains that on the day of the banquet, he'd have been terribly bored by the whole event. Even when the beast attacked, he didn't think much of it and just killed it like usual, but after he saved Melf, she didn't run away from him in fear or even break eye contact. Nor was she appalled by him being covered in blood, so he realized she might actually accept him for who he is. Roger understands that his engagement proposal was rather sudden, but a certain meddlesome family member of his wouldn't stop bugging him about it, so he decided to make things official as soon as possible. Melf's father understands and begins signing the contract, but before he finishes, he asks Roger if that's really the only reason he chose to get engaged to Melf. Roger assures him that he didn't make the decision on a whim, and he then goes on to give a TED talk about all of Melf's endearing characteristics, which he adores. Melf's father is now convinced that Roger truly cares for Melf, and he is relieved because in a world where eating monsters is shunned, he had worried that Melf would live a life of constant disgrace. And as a count, there was almost nothing he could do to protect her, so he tells Roger that he is leaving her in his care. And Roger assures Melf's father that once she joins the Galbraith family, he will do everything in his power to protect her. 10 days after the engagement was finalized, Roger had returned home, and Melf is busy packing up all her research documents with the help of her knights so she can move to Roger's territory. It has been a lot of work, but Roger insisted that Melf should bring everything from her research facility along with her, and he even left behind a few of his knights to ensure that she wouldn't have trouble carrying it all. She knows she and Roger are officially engaged now, but it still hasn't fully sunk in yet. After the marriage contract was signed, Roger even went as far as to imbue it with powerful magic to symbolize his commitment to Melf, but he knew Chaos would make fun of him for such a romantic gesture, so he asked her to keep that part a secret from him. It was a touching moment, but Melf's father was starting to feel awkward watching all of this, so he coughed to get their attention. Before the engagement was finalized, Melf's father had told Roger about a secret he had been keeping from Melf for a while now, and he asked him not to tell Melf about it, but Roger immediately turns to Melf and starts snitching on her father. He tells her that her father was the one who spread all the bad rumors about her being a monster meat muncher. Granted, he only did it because he wanted to dissuade people who would use her research for evil, since he knew weapons of mass destruction were a dangerous possibility. Roger understands the sentiment, and he's not too mad about it since Melf's father only did it to protect her from people who might use her for her research, but he makes it clear that he doesn't want to hear any more of those rumors again, and Melf's father gets the message. Melf wasn't really paying attention to the whole conversation, so she has no idea what they were saying, but they just told her she doesn't need to worry about it. She is still curious as to what they were talking about back then, but before she can ponder it anymore, Mullen, one of the knights, comes over to tell her that the leftover royal noodle has been frozen solid with magic and is ready for transport. He also asks what she intends to do with the noodle fur, so she tells him she's going to leave that behind for her father and stepbrother to make golden coats out of. She thanks Mullen for his help, and with this, she should be fully packed by the time Roger comes to pick her up. But now that she thinks about it, she wonders if engaged couples are meant to move in together so soon. The reason Roger was so insistent about it was because once winter hits, no one will be able to travel to or from the martial raid territory, so he wouldn't be able to see Melf for a whole 6 months if she stayed here. Just then, there's a knock at Melf's door, and the head butler Herman comes in to inform her that her escort has arrived. Herman has taken care of Melf since she was a little girl, so he is sad to see her go. But this is a joyous occasion. As Melf walks out of her room, it finally dawns on her that she won't be returning for a long time, so she wants to see her father one last time before she leaves. She heads over to his room and knocks on the door, but when she walks in, she finds Celia sitting on the couch waiting for her. Melf asks Celia what she's doing here, but she responds saying that even if she's only Melf's stepmother, she still wants to see her stepdaughter off before she leaves home. Melf asks where her father is, so Celia tells her he's outside making sure all of Melf's stuff is being handled properly. Melf really doesn't have anything to say to Celia, so she tries to keep the conversation brief and excuse herself as soon as possible. But all of a sudden, Celia scoffs and says she doesn't know how Melf managed to seduce a duke, but she wants to make it clear that her son is the sole heir to the martial raid family. Melf says she understands that, and it's pretty obvious since she's literally marrying out of the family, so she has no reason to care. Celia tells Melf that even if Roger kicks her out, she won't be welcome back here, and to that, Melf says, "I'm glad I won't have to stare at your raggedy face anymore." At least that's what she wanted to say, but instead, she just politely excuses herself and leaves the room because she doesn't want to cause any problems. She then heads down to the courtyard where her father has just finished, and he asks her if she's ready to go. He tells Melf she looks good in that coat, and it brings back a lot of memories for him because it's the coat that Melf's mother, Elise, wore when she got married to him. Melf had no idea that this coat used to belong to her mother, but since she was originally from the south, the cold winters here must have been a shock to her. Melf's father remembers how excited Elise was to play in the snow for the first time here, so much so that she overdid it and ended up getting sick shortly after. Melf laughs a little because she had no idea her mother was so silly at times. Her father wishes he could share more stories about her mother with her, but a few moments later, Roger arrives and says he is here to pick Melf up. He asks her if she is sure she has everything she needs since there's still a large pile of stuff over there, but she tells him those are all just early drafts of her research materials, so they aren't of much use to her anymore. Roger asks her if it's okay to have them burnt since he wouldn't want her research to fall into the wrong hands, and Melf says she's fine with that. After that, Roger turns to Melf's father and tells him he will be taking his daughter now, so he helps her up onto the back of his dragon and prepares to leave. Melf's dad is sad to see her go, but at least she'll be back to visit once spring comes next year. However, Roger tells him he was actually planning to keep Melf with him until their wedding date in the fall. This is the first Melf's dad is hearing of this, so he asks Roger what he will do about everything Melf needs to get to marry into the Galbraith family. Roger says he already plans to provide Melf with everything she could ever need, so Melf's dad doesn't need to worry about it. Also, since burning all of Melf's old research is bound to be a chore for them, Roger says he will handle it right now. He then points his finger at the trash pile and casts some magic, setting it all ablaze with huge pillars of fire. From the ground, Claude yells that Roger went way too far with that firepower and he apologizes, but he just wanted to show off a little in front of Melf. He also thanks Claude for looking out for Melf this entire time, and he sees great potential in him as a knight, so he tells Claude he is welcome to work in the Galbraith Knight's order if he wants to. She actually likes having him touch her hair, but it's still really embarrassing for her, so she's getting flustered. Late into the night, Roger and the other knights equip their dragons with glowing lights so they don't lose track of one another, and Melf finds it intriguing because she's sure that from below, the dragons must look like shooting stars to the people. They happen to be passing over the port town of Anver, and it is pretty late, so Melf asks if this is where they will be spending the night. Roger tells her he actually planned to keep flying until they reach the fort of Rittard, but if Melf is uncomfortable with the idea of sleeping in a fortress, he would be more than happy to arrange accommodations for her in the city. But Melf is actually quite excited by the idea of spending the night in a fort. Roger is surprised that she's okay with it, since the fort basically has rock-hard beds and nothing else, but Melf says she's fine with that. The main reason she wants to go there so bad is because the fort is right next to a river, and that would make it easy for her to catch some fresh fish monster right at the peak of spawning season. Till now, she's been limited to capturing the monsters that wander into the martial raid territory, but there are so many more options out here, and she wants to try them all. Roger understands Melf's point, and if she really wants to catch some fish monsters, he happens to know that Xanazes are quite common around this time of year, and Melf says she'd love to try preparing one as soon as possible. Roger is eager to taste it as well, but he reminds Melf it may take a while to catch one since they'd have to set a trap and wait for it to fall in. Melf hadn't thought about that, and she is really disappointed that she won't be able to try the fish tonight, but Roger tells her to cheer up since if they set the trap once they land, it should have caught a fish by morning, so they could have it for breakfast. Melf looks up at Roger and asks him if he's sure it will work out, and for a second, he's caught off guard by how cute her expression is, but he composes himself and tells her catching fish for breakfast is their best option, since he for one would much rather eat Melf's amazing cooking instead of the stale rations that are stored at the fort, and she is delighted to hear that. Now that she thinks about it, she recalls Chaos mentioning that Roger and the other knights had only ever had dreadful experiences with monster meat before they met her, so she asks Roger if he has ever cooked monster meat before. He tells her he wouldn't exactly call what he did cooking since all he ever did was pop it over an open flame and hope for the best. He and the other knights often had to resort to eating monster meat during extended expeditions when they ran out of rations, and it never ended well for them. And Roger was practically traumatized from it. Melf asks what kind of monsters he ate, so Roger thinks back and recalls how terrible the Boluvia, Screamwood, and Gargantus monsters all tasted. And being forced to eat all those to avoid starving was genuinely one of the lowest points of his life. A little while later, the group arrives at the fortress, so Roger tells Melf to hold on to him tightly so she doesn't fall off during the descent. Once they reach the ground, the guards stationed at the fort come out to meet Roger and his men and ask if he wants his usual accommodation. However, they are informed that Roger has brought a special guest with him today, so they are going to need to reserve the western wing of the fort for them. The guards are more than happy to comply, but they do warn that they don't have anything fancy to offer here. In the meantime, Roger asks Melf to unpack the things they will need, but after thinking for a little bit, he tells Melf it's not too late to arrange some accommodations in the city for her, because now that he's actually here, he realizes this place is way too crude for a lady like her. However, Melf assures him that it really isn't a problem since back at her research lab, she used to fall asleep on the floor all the time, so spending the night in a fort isn't a big deal for her. And besides, she says she wants to spend the night here because knowing that Roger is nearby is comforting for her. And Roger is both flustered and happy to hear her say that. Shortly after, he leads Melf to the room she will be spending the night in, and he tells her she can go to sleep right away if she wants since she must be tired from the long journey over here, but on the contrary, Melf tells him that the ride was really comfortable thanks to him keeping her warm, so she feels fine. Just then, Melf smells something cooking, and she does not like it, so she immediately heads to the kitchen to intervene. There she finds Mullen and Zeth in the middle of cooking a large pot of porridge for everyone in the fort, and she doesn't mean to be rude, but she tells them such a meager pot of porridge couldn't possibly satiate all the hungry knights here. That's why she suggests they should add some of this to it for extra flavor. She already pre-salted the moodle meat, so it should go well with the porridge, but Mullen asks if it's really alright since the moodle meat is limited in supply. Seth is also concerned, but more so because he still doesn't trust the idea of eating monster meat. Back when the rest of the knights were tasting it for the first time, he was busy doing something else, so he never got to try it, and despite everyone telling him it was perfectly safe, he still has his reservations about it. Melf offers to give him a piece to try right now to dissuade his worries, so she slices some meat and grills it over the fire before giving it to Zeth to try. She assures him that she made sure to remove all the magic toxins during preparation, so he doesn't have to worry about any food poisoning. Zeth nervously grabs the meat, and since he's getting some, Mullen asks Melf to make a piece for him as well, and she's more than happy to. Seth still isn't convinced that this is safe to eat, but Mullen tells him he's missing out because this meat is one of the best you could ever eat. Once Melf is done cooking Mullen's piece, he thanks her and eats it without any hesitation, praising Melf for her amazing cooking skills. However, all of a sudden, Roger shows up and he doesn't look happy about the fact that his soon-to-be wife is cooking for other men besides him. Melf tells him there's no need to be so upset because she already made some for him as well. Roger refuses to eat it because he's not done sulking yet. Melf doesn't want the meat to go to waste, so she thinks back to the time that her little brother refused to eat his food and recalls how the maid used to feed him, so she decides to do the same to Roger. She tells him to open wide, and Roger is so surprised that he inadvertently opens his mouth, and Melf seizes the opportunity to put the meat in there. She asks Roger what he thinks, and he admits that he really enjoyed the meat, so he can't really be mad anymore. Since Roger and Mullen have already eaten theirs, Zeth decides to do the same, and he is pleasantly surprised by how good it tastes. Melf is glad to hear that he likes it, but there's still a lot of work to do, so she asks for some help incorporating the moodle meat into the porridge. Later that night, as the knights all receive their meals, they are all stunned by how good the meat tastes, and it really boosts their morale. Melf is glad that everyone seems to be enjoying their meals, and Roger compliments her for finding a way to make the porridge taste so good. Melf tells him she didn't really do anything special, she just chopped some of the moodle meat into fine cubes and fried it before mixing it into the porridge. Regardless of how simple it was, Roger is still really impressed by her cooking. And come to think of it, everyone here has eaten except Melf herself, so he holds out a spoonful of porridge and tells her to open wide. Melf's cheeks go red as she realizes what Roger is trying to do, and she did do it to him earlier, but now that she's on the receiving end, she realizes it feels really embarrassing. She tries telling him that she can feed herself, but Roger insists on being the one to do it, so she gives in and lets him feed her. She really enjoys the taste, so she tells Roger she can eat the rest on her own, but he isn't satisfied yet, so he tells her to open up for the next bite. After he is done feeding Melf, Roger tells her he has something he wants to discuss. He says he wants Melf to stop addressing him so formally, and now that Melf thinks about it, she uses Roger's title a lot when she's talking to him. But since they are engaged now, there's no need for such formalities, so she agrees to address him casually from now on. Hearing her say his name so endearingly is music to Roger's ears, but all of a sudden his eyes flash gold and he winces in pain. Melf becomes worried and asks for someone to come over and check on Roger, but as Mullen comes running over, Roger tells him there's no need to worry. He simply lost control of his magic power for a moment, and while he does have a bit of a headache now, he says he is fine. Melf begins to worry that this may have been caused by her feeding him monster meat, but Mullen assures her that this isn't her fault. Roger simply has incredibly strong magic, and his body is capable of storing far more than the average person, but there is still a limit to how much he can hold at once, so he just needs to release some of it, and you will be back to normal in no time. To make Melf feel better, he tells her that this is the perfect opportunity to go hunting for some fish monsters, since it will give him a chance to expend his magic, so he says he will head out first thing in the morning, and Mullen says he will join him. However, Melf still can't help but worry about him because having such strong magic means Roger has to expend a lot more than the average person. Both monsters and humans have magic within their bodies, and just like the monsters, if a human were to build up large amounts of magic in their body for an extended period, it could produce toxins and drive them mad. This was the exact same condition that Melf's mother suffered from before she died, and Melf fears that Roger might end up the same way. One of the last memories Melf has of her mother is watching her slowly die in bed when she was a kid. And while her mother did her best to stay strong in front of Melf, it was clear that things wouldn't end well for her. Melf's mother explained to her that she was born with strong magical power, so it often goes out of control if she doesn't get rid of it in time, leaving her feverish and bedridden like this. Melf asked if there was anything she could do to help, and seeing her daughter's kind nature on display brought a smile to Melf's mother's face, but unfortunately, she was already too far gone. Shortly after, Melf's mother died and a funeral was held for her, but all the people invited began spreading rumors that Melf's mother died because of all the monster meat she had been eating, and Melf couldn't stand that because she knew what really happened. Her mother's spell to extract the magic from the monster meat had been incomplete at the time, and during one incident her body ended up absorbing the monster's magic, which is what led to her ultimate demise. Melf always loved watching her mom perform the spell, and she refused to let all her mother's hard work go to waste, so she decided to continue the research in her honor. She eventually discovered that since human bodies are a lot weaker than monsters, there's a higher risk of dying from accumulated magic toxins, especially if you are constantly exposed to those toxins. Had she known of this earlier, she might have been able to warn her mother and save her life, but it's already too late for that. So she decides to do her best to make sure the same fate does not befall Roger. Melf later wakes up in bed, and she wonders how she ended up here because the last thing she recalls was pacing around, trying to think of a way to help Roger. It eventually dawns on her that she must have fallen asleep on the floor, so Roger must have found and carried her to bed, and she can't believe she put herself in such an embarrassing position. She gets out of bed and begins looking for Roger, eventually finding him drinking some tea in the dining area. She asks him if he is feeling alright, and Roger assures her that he really is fine. His magic power was nowhere near the level of producing toxins yet, so he has no serious symptoms, and to prove it, he presses his forehead against Melf's to show her that he doesn't have a fever. Melf is relieved that Roger hasn't become feverish, but she's concerned about the fact that his body feels ice cold. He explains that he got soaked trying to catch the monster fish he mentioned last night, and that makes sense, but Melf feels bad that Roger had to go out in the middle of a cold night because of her request. He asks if she wants to come see the fish he caught, and she says she does, but right now, she says she's more worried about warming Roger up. Roger pulls her in close and says staying like this will keep him warm, and her face goes red with embarrassment at first, but she actually likes being close to Roger, so she has no complaints. Melf asks if Roger has already killed the fish, but he says he didn't and tells her it should still be swimming in the metal net he set up down by the river. Melf is excited to hear that, and since it will be dawn soon anyway, she says she'd like to start preparing the Xanas right away, and Roger likes the idea of that, so he says he will come with her, but Melf objects to that because she feels bad that Roger hasn't gotten any sleep since he spent all night catching the Xanas. He assures her that he is perfectly fine, but if she really wants to make him feel better, then he would really like a hug right now. Melf blushes and says she hasn't had a bath yet, so she is still dirty, but Roger says he doesn't mind since after all the work he did to catch the fish, he's probably dirtier than she is. Melf turns away in embarrassment, and Roger seizes the opportunity to hug her from behind, which gets her really flustered. Just then, Zeth happens to walk in and Melf awkwardly greets him, so he greets her back, but after getting a look at the situation, he feels like he's interrupting something, so he turns away. A little while later, once the rest of the knights are awake, Melf informs them that she plans to start preparing the Xanas from breakfast, but she's going to need someone to get some flour and oil for her since she wants to try battering and frying the fish. Zeth offers to go get the ingredients, and while he's doing that, Melf and Roger head outside so they can start walking to the river. Roger asks Melf if she has everything she needs, and she confirms it, cheerfully showing him the magic circles she made on some oil paper. Roger is intrigued since he had been wondering how Melf intended to extract the magic from the fish out here. She explains that she had originally intended to create a magic circle out by the river, but the water probably would have washed it away, so this was the next best option. A little while later, they arrive at the river, but Roger tells Melf to stand back a bit since the Xanas is still quite dangerous. He then orders the knights to pull up the net, and he warns them to be careful since monster fish are quite strong when they are in water, and a single blow from it could break a bone. As Roger is giving them orders on how to bring it up safely, Melf is mesmerized by how manly and assertive Roger is in situations like this. The Xanas is soon dragged up to the surface, and when Melf gets a good look at it, she is shocked because it's a lot bigger than she thought it would be. She has seen illustrations of it before, but it is much more magnificent in person, and she really wants to get a close look. However, Roger stops her. As much as he enjoys seeing Melf so enthusiastic, he reminds her that the Xanas could easily rip her arm off if she got too close, so it's best not to risk it. Anyways, now that the fish is out of the water, Roger asks Melf if she's ready for him to behead it, but to his surprise, she raises a sword and says she wants to do it herself. She thought that since this is just a fish, then maybe she would be able to handle beheading it, but the sword turns out to be way too heavy for her to handle, and considering the size of the Xanas, she realizes she would never be able to behead it properly like this. Roger tells her not to be too upset about it, since it takes a lot of practice to become proficient with a sword, so for now, she can just leave the dirty work to him. Though, with that said, he has never actually killed a fish before, so he asks Melf if there are any steps he needs to follow. Melf gets up and tells him that first, he will need to blind the Xanas. Roger and the others ask why, so she explains that she heard fish stop moving when they can't see anything, and having it sit still would make it a lot easier to kill. She places a piece of cloth over the Xana's eye, and just as expected, it stops moving, so she tells Roger to go ahead with the second step, and she says she needs him to stab the Xana's right behind the eyes and above the gills to destroy its brain. Roger does as instructed and stabs his sword into the Xana's head, and after a brief struggle, the light in the Xana's eyes goes out, so they have successfully killed it. It's now Melf's turn to get to work, so she covers the Xana's in her magic circles and she begins casting her spell shortly after. The magic energy in the Xana's is extremely thick, but there isn't much blood, so she doesn't need to worry about running out of space in her flask, and the extraction is completed without any issues. She asks Roger to hold on to the flask of magical energy, and now that the fish has been drained, she had planned to have it beheaded by Roger, but she feels bad asking him to do things like this all the time, so she asks him if he could teach her how to behead beasts on her own. Roger chuckles a little because he appreciates Melf's enthusiasm, but he tells her he is fine with beheading as many beasts as she needs him to because being involved in her cooking brings him great joy. Melf is really happy to hear that, so she tells Roger that she also enjoys having him help with her cooking. Back home, she always had to do her cooking and research alone because her father was too busy to help, and most other people thought she was a weirdo, so having Roger and his knights be so enthusiastic about helping her is a nice change of pace. After the knights have repositioned the fish, Roger gets ready to behead it, but before he makes his move, he asks Melf if there's anything he should take into account. She tells him it'll be best if he starts from the point he stabbed earlier and go diagonally towards the gills. That would be a challenge angle to behead a creature from, but Roger is the best of the best when it comes to handling a blade, so it's no trouble for him at all. Melf is amazed that Roger was able to cut it so perfectly, leaving all the flesh intact, and the other knights are just as impressed as she is. Later on, they return to the fortress where Zeth has just finished setting up everything they'll need to cook the fish. He apologizes for the inconvenience, but he says they are going to have to cook outdoors since the fortress's kitchen isn't big enough. However, Melf doesn't mind since it'll be easier to clean up afterwards this way. First, she'd like to remove the fish's skin and scales, so she asks if anyone has experience with something like that, and a knight named Ambry raises his hand, telling her that he should be able to handle it. Melf thanks him for volunteering, and a few moments later, Ambry starts slicing the skin off the fish. It takes a bit of effort, but Ambry does an immaculate job. So good, in fact, that there's not a single shred of meat left on the fish's skin, and now that they prepared the meat, it's time to start cooking. Melf prepares 2 pots of boiling oil, one at a lower temperature than the other, and she plans to fry the meat in 2 stages to get the best results. Roger has never heard of this method of cooking before, but he really wants to be involved, so he asks Melf if there's anything he can do to help. She wasn't expecting Roger to be interested in the actual cooking process, but since he wants to help, she asks him to pay attention to the temperature of the hotter pot of oil, but she warns him to be careful so he doesn't get burned. In the meantime, she gets started with the batter, and it's pretty simple. Normally she would add some eggs, but they don't have any, so she's just going to mix some water, flour, and spices together. After that, they will dip the pieces of Xana's meat in the batter and begin frying it in the cooler pot of oil. The fish will be left to fry there until it turns golden brown, and afterwards it will be removed with a perforated wooden ladle. And finally, they'll finish by frying the fish pieces in the hotter oil for a nice crisp on the exterior, while leaving a moist center. Once the first batch is done, Melf serves some to Roger while the other knights follow her instructions and begin cooking the rest of the fish. Roger also tried making a batch since he wanted to be involved, but he messed it up a little, so his fish turned out burnt. Melf tells him not to worry about it since not many people can get it right on the first try and his batch is still edible, but it may be a little dry. To show him that it really isn't that big of a deal, she asks him to feed her one of his pieces, and Roger is hesitant at first since he wouldn't want to feed Melf such substandard food, but she says she wants to eat it because Roger is the one who did the cooking. Plus her hands are still all sticking from the preparations earlier, so she can't exactly feed herself. Melf opens her mouth for Roger to feed her, but since those are still pretty hot, she asks him to blow on them before he puts them in her mouth. Roger understands, so he carefully blows on the fish, and after making sure it's not too hot, he gives it to Melf so she can have a bite. She is pleasantly surprised by how chewy the dry fish meat is, and Roger is surprised to hear that his botched cooking attempt actually tastes good, so he gives it a try, and he really likes it too. They then try the moist ones, and Melf loves how fluffy they are. But she also really liked the chewy dry ones, so she isn't sure which version to make. Roger suggests they should make both since the knights are bound to have divided views on which type is better, so they made a lot of the dry and moist versions. As expected, a bunch of knights seem to really like Roger's dry version, and since it contains less moisture, it could even be taken out on missions as food rations. She hadn't even considered how useful it would be to have dry fish, so she thanks Roger for opening her eyes, but he doesn't think he deserves any praise since it was a complete accident. On a side note, he asks Melf if she's alright since she has been standing all morning, but she says she's fine, and besides, she was having a lot of fun with Roger by her side. Roger is happy to hear that, but just then he notices that a few of the knights are carrying dishes inside, so he asks why the tables aren't being set outside. Melf explains that she asked the chefs to make some bread and vegetables to go with the fish, so they set everything up in the Great Hall. Melf then tells Roger to get going since none of the other knights will start eating until he arrives. Roger understands that, but he asks why Melf isn't coming with him, and she tells him she will head over once she is done disposing of the oil they used. He still doesn't want to go, but Mullen ends up pulling him away, and once they are gone, Melf starts quenching the firewood that was used. She feels a little guilty for making Roger go out his way like this, since even if he says he's happy to help, it's important for him to get adequate rest, so she didn't want to make him help with the cleanup as well. Just then, Zeth and Ambry show up and they offer to help Melf get the cleaning done as soon as possible, so they can all enjoy a wonderful meal together. Melf is grateful for the help, and since they are here anyway, she asks them if they'd like to try some of this. Zeth and Ambry take a look at the bowl she's holding, and it looks like there's some Xana's meat in there, but it looks a little different from the other batches. Melf explains that this is the Xana's belly meat and it's not fit for frying, so she didn't want to serve it to the knights earlier, but she wants to get their opinion on it. They both take a bite, and they are delighted by how good it tastes, though Ambry says it would taste better with a little sour fruit juice to go alongside it. Seth points out that a bunch of fruit was prepared for breakfast in the hall, so they might be able to get some juice there, and Melf is delighted that the belly meat won't have to go to waste, so she asks Zeth and Ambry to hurry to the hall with her before all the fruit is gone. Once Melf arrives at the hall, she finds all the knights enjoying their meals, and once Roger notices her, she calls her over to have a seat next to him. A moment later, Zeth comes over with the fruit he was talking about, and he informs Melf that this is called dabo, and it has juice that is really sour. Melf pours some over her fish to give the combination a try, and she is delighted by how well the flavors go together. Roger sees the sheer glee on her face, and he starts to wonder if it's really that good. Melf offers some to him and asks if he happens to like sour food, but Roger has never really tried eating anything that's sour before, so he doesn't know what it tastes like. He's willing to give it a try, but as soon as the fish and juice combo hits his taste buds, his face scrunches up because sour tastes way worse than he thought it would. He doesn't want to hurt Melf's feelings by saying he doesn't like it, but she can tell by the expression on his face, so she makes a mental note to avoid sour flavors whenever she's serving him food from now on. After breakfast is over, it's time for them to resume their journey to the Galbraith castle, so Roger tells everyone to get back on their dragons and they all take off. As they continue their journey, Melf gets curious about what Roger's life in Galbraith is like. So far, all the knights she has met seem to adore and respect him, but she wonders what the people in Roger's duchy think of him. Along the way, she asks Roger what kind of cities and towns there are in the Galbraith territory, and he tells her there were originally 30 cities here, but they've been whittled down since the Great Famine 17 years ago, so now there are only 12. He goes on to explain that during that time, the previous duke died suddenly, which is why he was chosen to become the next duke. And this comes as a shock to Melf, since she has never heard of a duke dying because of a famine before. She asks Roger how it happened, so he tells her that back then, an unprecedented number of monsters suddenly appeared in the forest of Urzinia, and before the knights could cull them, the magic power had already become too dense, causing tons of blood-mad magic beasts to descend upon Galbraith. Melf had no idea what had happened to the Galbraith territory, and Roger wasn't surprised she hadn't heard of it, as the duke at the time had fulfilled his duty and handled the situation. Many knights were lost in the battle, but the sacrifice was worth it because they were able to contain the disaster and no other nations were affected. Melf asks why they didn't receive reinforcements from the neighboring kingdoms, and Roger says the king probably did want to send help, but with the entire nation suffering from a serious famine, there weren't many resources to spare. Besides, the Knights of Galbraith swore an oath to defend the nation with all their lives, so dying in the line of duty is the most honorable way they could pass on. Roger and the rest of his knights also took that oath, so should something like that happen again, then it would be his duty to put his life on the line to defend the kingdom from monsters. Melf doesn't know what to say to that, because Roger just told her that he is prepared to sacrifice his life at any moment, and he said the whole thing with a smile on his face too. So he must really have accepted that he will die for the kingdom someday. It's not something she has any right to be upset about, but looking at Roger's face right now reminds her of how her mother used to smile all the time even though she was slowly dying, and the thought of losing Roger terrifies her. She begs him to never speak about losing his life with a smile on his face like that again, because she can't stand the idea of him accepting such a hopeless fate. Her mother died like she had resigned herself to that fate, and she doesn't want to see Roger go out the same way. She promised that she will continue her research and find a way to make sure a calamity like that never happens again. Roger can see that Melf is upset, so he apologizes for speaking as though he doesn't value his life since that isn't the case, but that's not the only reason Melf is upset. For better or worse, her and Roger's lives are going to be intertwined from here on out, so she wants to share some of that burden with him. She grabs Roger's hand, and while this may not count as an oath since she's not a knight, she promises to do everything in her power to make sure tragedy never befalls him for as long as they live, and Roger is left speechless by how serious she looks right now. He is touched that Melf cares about him so much, but he says he can't afford to put her in harm's way. However, that's not what Melf is asking him to do. She knows she can't fight like Roger or the other knights, but there are still many ways she could help them with her research, so she wants him to rely on her a little. Roger sees tears welling up in Melf's eyes, so he hugs her and asks her not to cry. He understands how she must feel about this, but to him, death has always been par for the course when you become a knight. He asks her if she'd like to hear a story about his past, and Melf is very much interested, so he starts by telling her that he was born as the second son of the previous king, and he got along great with his brother, Maxim, but the way they were treated was vastly different. Maxim had golden hair and purple eyes resembling those of the great king Maximus, who was known for his wisdom, so he gained the nickname Second Coming of the Great Sage. But as for Roger, his sight caused him to store magic energy in his eyes, and that caused quite a stir among the people in the castle. Maxim was often praised for how quick-witted and studious he was, but Roger, on the other hand, would often end up accidentally losing control of his magic power and destroying sections of the castle, so he always felt like a bit of a failure, but he eventually became strong enough to withstand the magic in his body. However, by then, people had already labeled him as the out-of-control prince, so they all feared going anywhere near him. The only ones who weren't scared of approaching him were the knights, so one day, Chaos was assigned to look after Roger, and though Roger recalls Chaos being extremely critical of him all the time, he was the first knight to swear his loyalty to him, so they became good friends later on. Chaos could have followed in his father's footsteps and joined the royal guards if he wanted to, but he chose to stay by Roger's side and follow him to the Galbraith territory when he became a duke. Around that time, in order to prevent a succession dispute, the previous king made Roger the Duke of Galbraith, now technically a subject to Maxim who would inherit the throne. At the time, the kingdom had been severely weakened by the drought and famine that the land suffered from, and a bunch of the nobles were on the brink of rebellion. Roger doesn't blame his father for how things turned out since it was the only choice he had, as many of the nobles had even started considering making Roger the king and asking him to go attack other nations to claim their resources. Conflict began to arise between the pro- and anti-war factions, and tensions were running high. Chaos's father even ended up dying as a result of the situation in the nation, and talk spread about how the Galbraith territory was being swarmed by monsters, so Roger eventually had enough and made the decision to do something about it. He ran to his brother and told him he would agree to step down as a successor to the crown and would become the Duke of the Galbraith region so Maxim could become king and they could put an end to the suffering of the people. Maxim felt bad that Roger would have to take up such a large burden at such a young age, but there was no other choice. So the two of them discussed it with their father and later announced to the nobles of the nation that the king had decided to abdicate the throne and Maxim was to become the next ruler while Roger would become the Duke of the Galbraith region. Roger and Maxim set out to accomplish their respective roles, and a few years later, Roger called for a meeting to discuss a few things with him. First of all, he didn't think it was fair that the knights of the Galbraith region didn't receive any benefits for the dangers they faced, so he wanted to offer them something more. Maxim agreed, so he thought for a second and suggested offering all knights who serve for at least 5 years a spot on the royal guard as a promotion. Roger liked the sound of that since the promise of a promotion would definitely boost morale. And on to the next topic, he wanted to discuss the possibility of using parts of the monsters they slay. Some could be used for valuable materials, such as claws, hides, and horns, and Roger felt it would be a waste to discard them all, so he was hoping the castle could purchase them from the knights. Maxim also thought this was a good idea, so he said that, as long as the materials were in good condition, he'd be willing to pay handsomely for them. Thanks to Roger's intervention, the situation in the Galbraith region was vastly improved, though he knows the only reason things worked out so well with his proposals is because he happens to be the brother of the current king. Melf thinks it is amazing that he was able to bring about so much change, and that's exactly why Roger feels obligated to put his life on the line to defend it. However, Melf cuts him off and tells him that instead of giving up his life, they should be thinking of a way to prevent another cataclysm from happening altogether. Roger asks if it's even possible to do something like that, but Melf tells him that her research deals with extracting magic toxins from living creatures, so if she can figure out a way to apply it, then she might be able to stop monsters from going mad altogether, and then Roger wouldn't need to risk his life. Roger is stunned because he hadn't really thought of it that way before, but then Melf goes on to add that if she figures out how to extract toxins from live beasts, Then she might even be able to reverse the madness and make the meat edible again. Roger smiles because only Melf would find a way to bring up new ways to cook monster meat in a conversation like this, and that's part of the reason he loves her. So he gives her a little kiss on the forehead, but Melf really wasn't expecting that, so she nearly passed out from the shock. Roger still loves seeing Melf's reactions to his displays of affection, and she thinks he's just teasing her, but he says he is completely serious about how much he loves her. Just then, Roger notices that they are getting pretty close to the Galbraith territory, since the forest they are currently flying over is the Urzini forest. He'd like to land and show Melf around, but the forest is way too vast for him to have memorized a path, so he'd definitely get lost if he went in there without a map. Melf recalls hearing that the Urzini forest is full of monsters, and Roger confirms that it's true. The land here contains a lot of magic ores, and the soil is so full of magic that monsters are practically the only creatures that can survive in that environment. Melf is about to ask Roger a question, but all of a sudden, he senses something wrong and asks Melf to get off his lap because things might get a little dangerous soon. Melf does as instructed, and a moment later, Mullen radios over to Roger, warning him that a flock of Bourguignon is on their tail. Roger stays calm and orders the knights to get into formation to prepare for evasive maneuvers, and after hearing that they are being chased, Melf decides to take a peek at the monsters, but when she does, she is absolutely terrified by how menacing those things look. Mullen reports that the monsters are speeding up, so Roger tells everyone to get ready to speed up as well, and he hands Melf a pair of wind goggles to protect her eyes. He also apologizes that they got attacked on Melf's first visit, but she says it's fine because this much is to be expected. Still, Roger is surprised that the Bourguignon even decided to attack in the first place. He'd understand it if he were flying solo, but he has a whole group with him, so why would they risk hunting now? Regardless of the reason, they need to get out of here as soon as possible, so Roger asks Melf to hold on tight and then proceeds to cast acceleration magic. The rest of the knights follow suit, and Melf is amazed by how fast they are moving, but then she notices that the ground seems to be getting awfully close, and that doesn't seem like a good sign. Roger ends up pulling up at the last second so they don't crash, but that scared Melf so much that she nearly screamed. She needs to take her mind off the danger somehow, so she starts fantasizing about how tasty the birds would be if she could eat them. But then she realizes the birds are probably thinking about eating her as well, so she gets scared again. The birds are still following them, and normally by now, Roger would have fallen back to deal with them himself, but he can't risk putting Melf in danger right now, so he orders the other knights to begin attacking the birds to break up their formation, and in the meantime, he tells Melf to brace herself because he's going to pick up the speed. Melf tells him he doesn't need to worry about her, but then Roger casts even stronger acceleration magic, and they start flying so fast that Melf can barely keep her eyes open even though she's wearing goggles. As for the other knights, Mullen is having trouble landing any shots on the birds since his accuracy is terrible at this distance, but aside from that, he and Zeth don't understand why the birds are chasing them so persistently today. They contact Roger and suggest that they should all land at a nearby fort to launch an offensive attack, but Roger rejects that idea since it's too risky. Instead, he says they'll keep flying until they reach the Galbraith territory's defensive line. Melf then realizes that Roger is being so insistent on running because he doesn't want to put her in danger. To make matters worse, the dragons are also being weighed down by all the stuff she brought along, so she's totally being a burden here. Just then, Melf remembers that she rigged her bags to explode if someone tried forcing it open, so they might be able to use it as a distraction against the birds. However, Roger immediately rejects the idea since he knows Melf's stuff is important to her, and he wouldn't want her to lose any of it. In that case, she asks him to drop her off on the ground so he can engage the monsters without having to worry about her, but Roger says no again because he wouldn't be able to protect her that way. He knows Melf must feel like a burden right now, but he assures her that everything is going to be okay because there are soldiers waiting at the defense line. So once they get there, it should be safe. Melf feels a little better after hearing that, but she still wishes there was some way for her to help. She doesn't know any attack spells and paper magic circles aren't very effective mid-air, but then she remembers that she still has a flask full of magic Xana's blood, and Roger once mentioned that the magic stored in one of these is enough to create weapons of mass destruction, so they might be able to use this. However, simply throwing it isn't going to be enough to take out all of the birds, so she proceeds to write down as many ancient magic circles as she knows to boost the flask's attack potency. She then hands it over to Roger and asks him to put some of his bodily fluids on the flask so he can activate it, but he has no idea what she's talking about. Melf explains that they can use Xana's blood to cast a spell to wipe out the birds, but since Roger has the most powerful magic out of anyone here, he needs to be the one to cast the spell. Roger takes a look at the flask and he is amazed by how many spells Melf managed to cram on here. It's got explosion, eruption, fire, gust, and blaze, so Roger is pretty much holding a pocket nuke right now, and he finds that hilarious. He cuts his hand so he can put some of his blood on the flask, and as he is activating the spell, he asks Melf when she had the time to think of this. She tells him she just came up with it a moment ago, which is rather surprising to Roger, but Melf is much more concerned about the cut he made on his arm, so she asks him to let her treat it once they make it to safety. Roger happily agrees, but first they need to make it out of this, so he issues new orders to his knights. He tells them he will be heading towards the rear, and everyone is to prepare as much acceleration magic as they can manage in the meantime because on his signal, they are going to fly away at top speed. However, he tells Mullen to remain in his current position because he has a mission for him. Once Roger arrives at the rear, he tells Mullen that he's going to need to act as their decoy and flies straight into that flock of monsters, and at first, Mullen thinks Roger is telling him to sacrifice himself, but Roger tells him that's not the case. He knows it's a dangerous job, but he needs Mullen to draw the attention of the monsters for a little while so he can use the bomb Melf made. But no matter what, he orders Mullen to make sure he makes it out of there alive. Roger then gives the order for everyone else to ascend while Mullen flies straight into the flock, and as expected, this completely disorganizes the monster's formation, so Roger is ready to use the bomb. He waits until Mullen is out of the blast radius, and then he chucks the flask at one of the birds. The monster swallows it whole on instinct, but that's not going to stop the explosion, so Roger tells Melf to sit back and wait. Moments later, there is a massive eruption of magical energy, and it's giving off tremendous pressure, but Roger tells Melf to brace herself because the spells she drew are about to activate. In the next second, the energy suddenly condenses into a massive ball of flames that would make Oppenheimer proud. Melf had no idea the explosion was going to be so massive, and the knights agree that it was a bit overkill, but it did solve their monster problem, and Mullen even managed to make it out unharmed, though Melf is a little disappointed that all that monster meat had to go to waste. She's also mortified by the realization of what she has just created, since she was always so focused on eating delicious meat that she never considered how destructive the pure magic extract could be. It looks like Roger wasn't exaggerating when he said this could be used to destroy nations, so she asks him if he thinks her research is too dangerous. He can see that Melf is really concerned about this, but he tells her he won't allow anyone to rebuke her here, so she can fully devote herself to her craft. And as for whether it is too dangerous, he points out that the extracted energy can be used for more than just making weapons. It can be used as fuel for cooking and many other things, so he is sure it will be beneficial to society. In fact, they can start testing it out in the Galbraith region immediately, since he's sure that people would be happy to have an alternative to using wood for their fires. And it would also provide a stable source of heat and light during the harsh winter months, and hearing that makes Melf feel a lot better since it means her invention can be used to make the lives of people better instead of worse. Back home, no one was really interested in her research, so she never really considered the impact that it could have on the people around her. But that's all the more reason for her to be grateful to Roger, because not only has he shown genuine interest in her research, he is also actively showing her a way forward, and she couldn't be happier. Roger tells her he's also grateful to her because without her quick thinking, they wouldn't have been able to defeat those monsters, but Melf says most of the credit should go to him since the power of the spell activation is dependent on the user's magic, and Roger was the only one capable of using such hastily drawn circles. Roger agrees that it was a team effort, and since they work so well together, he suggests they could go monster hunting together sometime, and those words are the best thing Melf has heard all day. She's already picturing all the fun she'd be able to have with Roger, so she asks him if he's serious about letting her go hunting with him. And Roger says he's not joking, so she begins celebrating. But just then, Chaos comes flying in at breakneck speeds because he heard a massive explosion coming from this direction and thought Roger might be in danger. Roger tells him he's a little late to the party since he and Melf already took care of the monsters. Chaos is relieved to hear that they are alright, but after realizing that Roger was responsible for the explosion, he starts yelling at him for using such a recklessly destructive attack out here. Melf sheepishly raises her hand and is about to explain that she's technically the one who created the explosion, but before she could say anything, the rest of the soldiers that came with Chaos show up, and they are all excited to see Roger's bride for the first time. They start showering Melf with compliments because they think she looks lovely, but she gets really embarrassed since this is the first time she has had so many people be nice to her at once. They eventually arrive at the heart of the Galbraith territory, Midlake, and the castle at its center is where Roger stays. Melf thinks it's odd that Roger's castle looks a lot like a fortress, but that's before this city was built. This place was actually a fortress made to defend against monster attacks. Some people still call it a fortress city to this day, but if that's the case, Melf asks if that means monsters from the forest can come all the way out here. Roger admits that the city does get attacked by a monster or two from time to time, but it's not nearly as bad as it used to be, so life here is relatively peaceful. Melf is mesmerized as she looks at all the beautiful walls surrounding the city because they are unlike anything she has ever seen back home. Roger goes on to explain that the forest used to be a lot closer to the city before he made the decision to pull back the defense line. People initially gathered here because the previous duke made this place his base, but the fear of monsters was still very much apparent among the people, and when the cataclysm occurred, the problem became far worse. Melf looks down at the base of the walls and she can see what appears to be scorched earth, so she assumes it must be the aftermath of Roger fighting to protect the city. Though he assures her that the situation really isn't that bad, so there's no need for her to worry. Anyway, it's time for them to head into the city, so Roger tells Mullen to inform the guards of his arrival so he can open the front gate, and he asks Chaos to go get Melf's baggage and bring it to the castle later. He then flies through the city entrance with Melf, and along the way, he explains that they have to fly through this tunnel because there is currently a magic barrier over the city to protect against aerial monsters. Melf is amazed to learn of this, but it consumes a lot of mana, so they can't afford to keep it on all the time. They probably turned it on because they heard about the flock of monsters that attacked, and Melf is a little worried that more might attack again, but there's no way of knowing what will happen for sure. To be safe, Roger says they should remain alert for the rest of the day, but that aside, it's time for him to welcome him to his city. Once they land, Roger asks Melf to come check her luggage to make sure everything is still here, but as she is doing so, she notices that Roger's dragon seems to be staring at her a lot. At first, it freaks her out because she doesn't know why the dragon is looking at her, but then she follows its line of sight and realizes that it is actually staring straight at the leftover royal noodle meat that Roger happens to be holding. She feels kind of bad for it, so she walks over to Roger and requests that he let the dragon eat some of the meat. Roger understands that Melf wants to give the dragon a treat, but he is hesitant to do so because he was really looking forward to eating the rest of the noodle later. But since his dragon really seems to want it, Roger caves and hands the meat over to it. After that, he officially welcomes Melf to his castle, but as they are walking across the bridge, Melf notices a lot of fish in the moat, so she bends down to get a closer look at them. The fish in the moat are called Bacta, and they are kept there as a means of cleaning up waste that ends up in the moat every now and then. They are monsters like the Xanas, but she wonders if they would taste just as good if she cooked them. Just then, Melf notices her reflection in the water, and as soon as she realizes how frizzy her hair is, she starts freaking out. It must have happened during the chase on the way here, but there's no way she'll be able to fix it with her hands, and she'd hate to be introduced to everyone here looking like a mess, so she needs to figure out what to do quickly. She nervously calls over to Roger and says she has a question to ask, so Roger stops to listen, and the fact that he doesn't seem bothered by her messy hair has Melf wondering if she's making a big deal out of this for no reason. But she quickly dismisses the idea and reminds herself that as the Duke's wife, she needs to make a good first impression no matter what. Roger is still waiting to hear what Melf's problem is, but then he realizes she is sitting near the edge of the moat and he assumes she must be interested in the Bacta. He tells her that Bacta fish are delicious when stewed, and for a moment, Melf forgets all about her hair problem and starts talking about how she has never gotten to try Bacta before. Roger asks if she'd like to try one, and Melf happily agrees, but then she realizes that she went way off topic just now, so he tells Roger she actually wanted to ask about something else. She says she'd like to make herself presentable before she is introduced to everyone, so she was hoping he'd show her to a room where she can titty up a bit. As soon as Roger hears this, he realizes he has been incredibly inconsiderate of Melf's needs, so he immediately calls Mullen and tells him they have an emergency, so he should go summon the Blanche Corps at once. He then turns to Melf and apologizes because there aren't any real chambermaids on staff at the castle, and he didn't think to hire any in preparation for Melf's arrival either because they haven't had a duchess here for a long time. With that said, the Blanche Corps is the best he can offer at the moment because they are a team of female knights. Once they are assembled, he orders the knights to treat Melf with proper respect, and the knights all oblige. The captain of the corps introduces herself as Blanche Lucible and says it's a pleasure to meet Melf, but Melf is left speechless by how good-looking Blanche is. The other two knights are Vice Captain Natalie and Lillian, and Roger informs them all that Melf was just on her first flight earlier, so he'd like them to help her recover from it. Blanche accepts the task, and Melf asks Roger how long she has until he introduces her to everyone. Roger hasn't really set a fixed time for the introduction yet, but he thinks dinner time would work out well. So Melf has a few hours to get ready. But before she leaves, Roger grabs her hand and takes off his glove to give her a little kiss. But this makes Melf go all red in the face because she can't believe he did that while the knights were watching. Roger tells her it's not a big deal since they are engaged after all, and in case Melf is wondering, his room is that one right there, so she can stop by any time if she needs something from him. Once Roger has left, Natalie calls over to Melf and gestures for her to enter her room so they can get started, and Melf is amazed by how pretty her new room is. But before she steps in, she hesitates because her shoes are dirty, and she is worried about staining this beautiful fluffy carpet. Blanche sees the problem, so without a second thought, she picks Melf up and carries her over to the chair. But being picked up so casually by Blanche has Melf questioning a few things about herself. Blanche then takes a knee and asks Melf to show her her feet so she can start massaging them, but Melf pulls away and says she can handle that by herself. While Melf is taking off her boots, Natalie and Lillian approach and ask her if there are any sweets she'd like them to bring for her, but while Melf appreciates the offer, she doesn't want to take up too much of their precious time, so she tells them that she can handle things from here. However, Blanche refuses to accept that since Roger trusted them to be Melf's personal guards and they take that duty very seriously, so they want Melf to think of them as her knights. Blanche presents her sword to Melf as a symbol of her loyalty, and as she unsheathes it, she spots a familiar insignia on the blade, the same one that Roger had on his sword the day he staved her. She resheathes the sword and tells Blanche and the others that they were all chosen by Roger, and that alone makes them worthy of her trust, but she still knows next to nothing about them, and likewise they don't know anything about her. She returns Blanche's blade to her and reminds her that a sword is tantamount to a knight's life, so she shouldn't be handing it over to a stranger like this. She is sure they must have heard of the rumors around her, but she made Roger a promise, and on the way here she figured out what she must do to make herself useful to this region, so until she proves herself worthy of the title of Duchess of Galbraith, she wants Blanche to hold off on offering up her blade. Blanche acknowledges what Melf is trying to say, so she says she will also work towards becoming a knight who is worthy of serving Melf, and Melf thanks her for understanding. Blanche then begins putting her sword away, but as she is doing so, Melf becomes curious and asks if her sword happens to have been made by the same person who made Roger's blade. Blanche confirms that all the knight swords are made by a smith here in Midlake, but she wonders why Melf would want to know that. Melf explains that she actually wants to get a sword of her own made, so she was hoping that Blanche would introduce her to the smith she just mentioned. However, Blanche doesn't think that would be a good idea. Melf pleads with her to at least mention the Smith family, and Blanche doesn't know how to say no to Melf when she's being so insistent. A little while later, Blanche offers to help Melf brush her hair, but as soon as she starts brushing, she realizes that there's way more hair than she thought there would be, so she apologizes to Melf and tells her she may not be equipped to handle this mess on her own. Melf begs her to keep trying since she really needs help getting her hair back to how fluffy it used to be because Roger mentioned that he liked it that way. Blanche had no idea that Roger liked fluffy hair so much, but if that's the case, then she makes it her personal mission to ensure that Melf's hair is untangled, perfumed, and fluffed up in time for dinner tonight. Blanche pulls out all the hair care equipment she has on hand and gets to work straightening out Melf's hair, but Melf feels a little bad about making Blanche do this instead of her regular night duties. She apologizes for the inconvenience, but Blanche says it's not a problem because she used to brush her daughter's hair all the time, so she's used to it. Melf is glad to hear that Blanche isn't being inconvenienced by her, but she can't get over the shock of finding out that Blanche is married with kids all of a sudden. Blanche can see that Melf is curious, so she informs her that she has 2 kids, a daughter and a son. Blanche's daughter has recently shown an interest in becoming a knight just like her, which Blanche's husband has been rather worried about. Blanche is happy that her daughter wants to follow in her footsteps, but she is also aware how difficult it can be to work as a knight in the castle, which is why she can't understand the reasoning behind Melf wanting to make a sword for herself. Melf says she simply needs a blade in order to butcher monsters properly, and this catches Blanche off guard because she wasn't expecting an answer like that. But to be sure this isn't a misunderstanding, she asks Melf if she plans to butcher monsters so she can eat them afterwards. Melf confirms this. After all, eating monster meat was the whole reason she and Roger got together in the first place. She calls over to Natalie and asks her to go get her work tools in those bags over there. So Natalie does as she is told and pulls out a bag of knives which would qualify as war veterans. These blades seem to have been used so much that they shrunk to less than half of their original width, and Melf explains that she usually uses them to cut through bones and flesh, so the wear on them is normal. Just then, Lillian asks if Melf really eats monster meat normally, and Natalie rushes to cover her mouth because she thinks that's a rude question to ask, but Melf says she doesn't mind, since she expected them to be curious about her monster-eating habit. Melf goes on to explain the whole reason she started working on developing ways to eat monster meat, and Lillian finds the whole thing incredible. To tell you the truth, she's always wanted to try eating monster meat, but no one ever lets her have any because they say terrible things will happen. She asks Melf if she'd cook some monster meat for her, and Melf says that as long as Roger is okay with it, she could prepare some of the leftover Xanas, and Lillian is overjoyed, but Blanche tells her it is incredibly rude to be making requests of Lady Melf, so she is dismissed for the day. Lillian tries to argue, but Blanche insists that she leave at once, so she reluctantly bows to apologize and starts heading for the door. However, before Lillian goes outside, Melf stops her and asks how old she is. Lillian answers that she is still only 15 and technically the age to be considered an adult here is 17, but in her case, since she has already been knighted, she's a proper adult. In that case, Melf asks her if she really wants to try some monster food together because she would be more than happy to accommodate. Blanche and Natalie try telling Melf that she doesn't need to do that, but Melf tells them they are invited to join in as well if they want. In fact, if anyone has any suggestions on what kind of monster they'd like to try, then she'd be more than happy to listen. Natalie and Blanche don't really know what to say to that, but Lillian raises her hand and says she'd like to try the fruit of the Screaming Wood monster. She has never tasted it before, but she once heard Mullen say that it was the most delicious fruit he had ever tasted. However, he did end up coming down with a terrible stomachache and fever afterwards, so that kind of put Lillian off from trying it. However, if Melf insists that she can make it safe to eat, then she would love to find out what it tastes like. Melf is surprised because she never really thought of trying any monster plants before, but if the fruit is described as rich, sweet, and juicy, then she can't wait to try it. And seeing Melf so excited gets Blanche and Natalie invested as well. This was the end of episode 9. Subscribe to not miss the next part.